is Russia continuing its advance into Bakhmut, but at the same time talking about preparing for the Ukraine counteroffensive. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's March 25th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. All right, first off, let's take a look at the control map. And as you guys can see, the biggest change is right there in Bakhmut. You can see that Russia has made some fairly significant I'm going to say advances, particularly in the south of the city. You can see they've taken a few blocks here in the south, as well as advanced up the western bank of the Bakhmutka. And this, of course, is creating a fairly stable looking perimeter within Bakhmut. A lot of these salients where Ukrainian forces may have been pressured on several sides have sort of smoothed out, and this has become a much somewhat easier to defend perimeter still in the city. Ukrainian forces continue to control at least a portion of the western bank of the Bakhmutka, but again, Russian forces advancing steadily block by block from the south, though their pace has slowed considerably. When we look at the combat map, you guys can see that Russian forces, this is actually assessing that they control a significant portion of this railway here and are pressuring H32 and some of the other major thoroughfares out of the city, literally are just a few meters away. So a difference here, again, they're assessing that Russia actually controls all the way up to this line of combat here. So the theme, if there is one, is that Ukraine is going to have to steadily pull its forces from Bakhmut, but I think that the other story is that Russian total volume of attacks is down to nearly half of even what used to be the average number of attacks in a given day across the front lines, just 59. And you can see their locations have become somewhat more focused, right? You can see here in Avdiivka, they're also assessing that Russian forces have pushed heavily from the south and are really trying to pressure this 542 highway as well as some of these railways out of Avdiivka. So this is a tight spot for Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka. The question is, of course, where is the counteroffensive going to come? Russian forces, of course, seem to... well, it's tough to know. Are they wrapping up their own offensive push? The Russian Ministry of Defense seems to think so. It says that Bakhmut has largely stalled, an extreme attrition of the Russian force, but Ukraine has also suffered heavy casualties during the defense. It's tough to read into that. What they mean by heavy casualties versus extreme attrition. This is sort of subjective terms, which I understand. They're not going to give their best assessments publicly. And of course, what's also interesting is that Russia has likely shifted its focus to Avdiivka and Crimea Savote, areas where Russia, it says, only aspires to stabilize its front line. I don't think that's the case. Again, it's hard to argue that after such a high volume of offensive work that and being so close to really putting Avdiivka in considerable danger, that you're going to see Russian forces sort of stop here. I think you're going to see Russian forces push, regardless of the casualty levels, until they have seized at least the majority of Bakhmut and the majority of Avdiivka. Once again, the ink that's being spilled, though, it isn't focused on these. It's actually focused on the coming counteroffensive. Even the head of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, emphasized that Russian general staff is aware of the counteroffensive. It's considering how to prepare for it. One prominent Russian mill blogger said that the rumors that Ukraine is going to attack into Belgorod Oblast are a rumor in order to draw Russian troops to border areas, freeing up Ukrainian troops to launch sectors in other fronts. And this, of course, makes just sense because, again, Belgorod Oblast is part of Russian sovereign territory. It's not really. Ukraine neither wants nor needs to liberate this. It's sort of preposterous. And chances are even the Russians would recognize this. Another Russian mail blogger, of course, says the Ukrainians will launch their counteroffensive before Russia's industrial base can ramp up production. This is also probably spot on. But Prigozhin, of course, said that he knows there's a counteroffensive claim. All of this sort of indicates that the Russian counteroffensive, or the Russian offensive, seems to be reaching its end game. There's a slowdown of Russian operations, and they seem to be acknowledging on some level that there will be a coming Ukrainian counteroffensive. What, of course, bothers me about this is the initiative, right? You don't want your enemy to, you don't want to be on your enemy's timeline. And right now, the Russians seem to be indicating that they're playing it like chess. They're like, okay, guys, we've finished our turn. Now it's your turn, like it's a game of civilization. Your goal should not to allow your enemy to do those things and make those moves and sit there and go, okay, we are done now. Now it's your turn to try to hit us. It's like the difference between slap fighting and MMA. Slap fighting, there's not really an art for it, right? Whereas in mixed martial arts, of course, your goal is to get your opponent off balance, hit them and attack them in ways and from angles they don't anticipate. And that's true in the warfare as well. If Russia is sitting there and anticipating a counteroffensive, they're going to have forces in reserve at a high level of readiness, ready to respond to plug holes in the front line. And it's going to make any offensive effort that much harder. Instead, what you would want to do is hit Russia when it's committed its forces to their apex in places like Bakhmut or Avdiivka or Volodar. Once those forces are committed to combat, that's the time to strike. As crazy as it sounds, when you are under the most pressure is when your enemy is least prepared to be pressured themselves. And it's one of the biggest issues that I have with the way Ukrainian generals are fighting this fight. I understand they believe they're attriting Russia, but it's not clear how attritional this is for Russia. They have deep wells of people. They, again, have a large enough defense industrial base, and they're willing to send these troops into combat with gear that would not be acceptable for Ukrainian forces or NATO forces. And so I think I would characterize it as a operational or even strategic failure, that we are still giving Russia more time to prepare and acknowledge for the coming counteroffensive. Anyway, guys, if you want, of course, the breakdowns of the helmet cams, the GoPro, the drone footage, the stuff that gives us the ability to look deep and understand how these forces are equipped, what their strategies, how they're fighting, you want to become a member of Combat Vet News. Combat Vet News is the site I just launched. You can see we have all of the YouTube videos on here for free, but because I recently got booted off Patreon, we also have a members only section where we've got all the breakdowns that YouTube and Patreon won't let me show you. Not only are we getting the Patreon archived videos back up, but we're looking at all sorts of stuff, right? The recent one we just checked out is Ukrainian mechanized infantry clearing Russian tanks, and it's a great microcosm of what I'm talking about, where you have Russian it shows that even with a small number of personnel and a fairly low sophistication BMP with a good plan and relatively decisive action, a offensive effort can be very, very effective, even though it doesn't necessarily need advanced equipment, a bunch of personnel, the perfect plan, if you execute it violently and you don't stop and give the enemy time to reconstitute. Anyway, that's all I had. Thank you guys so much, and as always, I'll be back in the next day or two, and we're going to get the shout out up for everyone who's become a lieutenant and colonel tier member of combatvetnews.com. Thanks again. See you in the next one.